festival in an Indian village. The Chikuna form the largest Indian population in the Amazon region, and like all indigenous people there, they are fighting to hold on to what's left of their culture. The Western clothes, jeans, t-shirts and trainers, might suggest that they're fighting a losing battle. In the western region of the Amazon basin, near the foothills of the Andes, there are 25,000 Chikuna Indians living in scattered villages. The life of the Chikuna is dominated by the forest. Here, a huge tree trunk has been hollowed out to make a canoe. The heat and smoke from the fire dries out the wood, but when it is warm, it can be stretched from tree shape to canoe shape. The Chikuna were one of the first Indian groups to be contacted by the Portuguese explorers who came to the Amazon area of Brazil in the 16th century. Like many Indian people, their culture has been changed a great deal by contact with the outside world. Some traditions and skills, though, have not been lost, like building dugout canoes. It's been going on in this way for centuries. The canoe will be used by men of the village when they are fishing. The Amazon River system teems with fish. There are more freshwater fish here than all of the rest of the world together, and the Indians know how to catch them. The fisherman uses a line to catch his fish. But he can also use a spear, spotting a fish in the shallows at the edge of the water and spearing it with deadly accuracy. Fish are the main source of protein for the people of Tabatinga. Tabatinga has 25 families, a population of around 150. The village is neat and well ordered. The houses are built from small trees, palm leaves and bark. They're on stilts to keep the insides dry in the rainy season and to keep them cool. They are built around a community building called a maloka. It is here that the Chikuna meet to discuss village matters. The land around the village is divided up into individual plots for each family, but everyone in the community helps with the heavy work of cutting down trees. The timber will be used to build houses, to make canoes and spears, or as firewood. But the real purpose of this bout of tree felling is to clear an area of land of about 3 hectares for growing food. Some of the tree stumps are left in the ground. They will be difficult to remove and they prevent erosion. It's tradition that the woman of the family which is going to farm the land lights the fire to burn away the waste wood. It will bring good luck, but the burning puts ash into the soil which acts as a fertiliser, providing nutrients for the crops. When those nutrients are used up, the clearing will be abandoned and a new one will be cut in the forest. This is shifting cultivation. The plot looks very untidy. The crops are scattered round tree stumps. They are all mixed up rather than being in distinct beds. But it is efficient and does little damage to the forest. In fact, the land may be farmed again after 30 years. This is the main crop, manioc, a root vegetable that is a central part of their diet. They also grow pineapples, bananas, some corn and beans. Any surplus is sold or traded, usually for clothes. Everyone in the family joins in the work, and from the age of 6 or 7, the children will have their own plot to tend to. The village has come to depend more and more upon gardens like these. The men do still hunt. Once they used bow and arrow or blowpipes to fire darts tipped with poison, but that's something that's been lost from their ways. Nowadays they use a shotgun, obtained like the axes and machetes in a trade from a town along the river. But the cartridges for the guns are expensive. This man is the only one in the village who has any. Even so, he's only got 4, so everyone must count. The hunter is an expert shot. This time his catch is a grey Saki monkey. Kills like this are rare, and the chacuna depend much more upon the river for food. The Indians can find a use for just about everything in the forest. They know that there is poison in the roots of this vine. They're going to use it to catch fish. Again, this is a communal activity. While one man builds a dam, the others cut a mass of roots. They carry the roots about 1 kilometre upstream. While the boys and girls mash up the roots, one of the women is making a basket that will be needed soon. The mashed up root is swirled around in the water. Meanwhile, the basket's almost finished. The poison will stun the fish in the stream. It paralyses their gills. They can't breathe and they have to come to the surface for air. That's when the Indians can catch them. Or they wait for them to float downstream to the newly built dam. Fish is the main source of protein for the Indians. This catch is a week's supply of food for 2 families. It's not only the vines that are poisonous. Manioc, the main crop from the garden, is also poisonous. The chacuna know how to get rid of the poison so that the root will be safe to eat. First it's ground up, then it's put into a special basket made from woven palm leaves. The juice is squeezed out. The manioc is cooked in a very large pan over a fire. Manioc is made into a gritty flour called farinha. It is an important source of carbohydrate. So the Indian diet is basic: farina, fish, vegetables and meat if they can get it. And fruit from the trees which have been left standing around the village. The boys are gathering a fruit called inga. It is a long, thin pod with seeds inside. The seeds are wrapped in something that looks and tastes like marshmallow. In many ways, it seems an ideal existence. It's always warm and sunny. The food is plentiful, if limited in variety. There's room to play and be free. The Chukuna work hard, but if there's no work to do, they love to sit and talk and share a joke. But there are pressures on indigenous people throughout Amazonia, not just in terms of outside influences on their cultures and traditions. The lands are constantly under threat from business interests who want to set up cattle ranches or dig for minerals or cut the trees down for valuable timber, or just from land speculators. In the past decade, more than 500,000 indigenous people have been moved from their traditional lands, often forcibly. There have been many killings. In many places, the outside world is closing in on them. At school in another village just downriver, Chukuna children are learning skills that they will need in the world outside their homelands. They're taught science, mathematics, and the language of Portuguese, which is the main language of Brazil. But they also have lessons in their own language of Chukuna and about Chukuna culture, which is still very strong. Back to the festival. It is taking place in a bigger Chukuna village, an hour by canoe from Tabatinga. The centrepiece of the event is an ancient ritual. There are many like this within other Indian cultures in Brazil. This girl has just reached puberty. To mark the transition from childhood to adulthood, and as a punishment for her sins as a child, every hair on her head is pulled out. She's been given an alcoholic drink to make her drowsy, but it's still incredibly painful. Everyone in the village, boys and girls, has to go through this. The hair soon grows back. To our eyes, it may seem unnecessarily cruel. To the Chukuna, it's a part of their history that they're determined to cling on to. "800 kilometres to the east on the banks of the river Taruma live the Ramundo family. They're caboclos, descendants of Indians, Portuguese settlers and African slaves. Their way of life is quite different. Caboclo people don't live in villages. They own their own plot of land, usually by a river. They are small farmers and spend most of their time working on the plot. Like the Indians, Caboclo people grow their own food, but they also produce a lot of extra fruit and vegetables which they sell to markets. Their farming is more organised. Notice that their crops are grown in straight lines on larger, tidier plots. The caboclos usually clear an area of forest and plant it. When the soil is exhausted, they enlarge the clearing, leaving the old land as pasture. Eventually, the clearing becomes very large and it is more difficult for the forest to regrow. This is another form of shifting cultivation. It is slash and burn cultivation, and it can cause permanent damage to the forest. For this family, this harvest is of pineapples, inga fruit and sugarcane. Unlike the Chukuna Indians, they keep a few cattle to provide meat and milk for their own use. Caboclo family are much more involved in the local market economy than the Indians. They take their produce to market once a week. The market is in the city of Manaus, 4 hours away by boat, so the river is their lifeline. Being able to trade, sell their produce and buy other goods gives them a different way of life to many of the Indian people in the region. Further east along the river, there are Caboclo people with another lifestyle altogether, a lifestyle not based on the forest. Here, the trees have been cleared. In the basin of the Amazon, the people live on the várzea, the levees and islands of the floodplain of the river. For 6 months of the year, they're surrounded by water. In the dry season, their homes are on land, but during the wet season, the river level rises, and this causes many problems. The farmland is underwater, and they depend on their livestock and fish from the river. Every morning, the men from each family have some hard work to do, cutting down long grass that grows on the flooded meadows of the Amazon plains. It's hard to imagine that in the dry season, this will be farmland. It will be some of the most fertile land in the Amazon basin because of the silt deposited by the river during flood. When the water is high, it's a different sort of harvest. The cattle live in these raised corrals throughout the season of high water levels, and they have to be fed every day. It's back-breaking work. But it's worth it. For this small farmer, a cow is a good investment. It can be kept for food, but it can also be sold if the family needs some money quickly. Also, a cow will continue to grow whatever the weather, whereas crops in the fields depend upon the changes in the river. Fishing is no easier than farming in the wet season. There is much more water in the river because of the rain, so the fish that live there have more room to move. That makes them more difficult to catch. The Caboclo people of the floodplain look to fishing for an income, but only when the river is much lower than this. The season of low water is the season of plenty, when the abundant crops from the farmland and the fish from the rivers provide food to sell in the markets and for storage for winter. The lives of the Caboclo people of Amazonia, like those of the indigenous peoples, are closely linked with their environment: the river, the floodplains, the forest. But those places are changing rapidly under growing pressures of development, so the lives of the people will also change forever. Exploiting the Amazon rainforest is nothing new. The first kind of industrial activity was this. Manuel is a rubber tapper. He gathers latex and natural resin, which forms just under the bark of a rubber tree. Manuel works an area of 30 hectares of forest. There may be 30,000 trees on his land, but only 60 are rubber trees. He can harvest from the tree many times, and he does virtually no damage to the forest. In this, Manuel is almost unique among those who exploit the rainforest. Nowadays, almost everything to do with exploiting the forest starts with this: the cutting down of trees. Here they are being cut down for timber. So far, the main logging activity has been on the edges of Amazonia, where roads have been built. In fact, transport is a major problem. That's why only the most valuable trees are cut, and that means mahogany. Mahogany is worth up to £500 per cubic metre on the world market. Demand for mahogany is particularly high in the United Kingdom because many people like to have mahogany furniture or doors. Unfortunately, mahogany trees are also quite rare and they don't grow close together. Only 1 to 2 adult trees are found per hectare. That has serious consequences. To get to a mahogany tree in the middle of the forest, roads have to be cut through. When it's felled, the tree often pulls down other trees that are connected to it by vines. Then the cut tree has to be dragged out to the road. More trees are damaged on the way. For every mahogany tree that is to be cut, as many as 28 others are damaged in the process of getting it. After the mahogany is cut, the loggers may go back into the forest, this time for less valuable wood. But at this stage, more timber is taken out, up to 20 trees per hectare, and the damage to the other trees is the same as before. Cutting like this begins to have an effect on the overall health of the forest. It's a massive problem. In this one small area of forest alone, there are 2 chainsaw operators working each day. They have to cut down at least 30 trees a day to earn their wages. That's 60 trees a day, 300 trees a week, 15,000 trees a year, just in this one small area of forest in Amazonia. The movement of lorries loaded with felled timber is relentless. Everything depends on access by road or by river. This raft is made up of around 3,000 freshly cut mature trees. Whether carried by road or river, the timber all ends up in the same place: the sawmill. It is estimated that there are 4,000 sawmills in the Amazon region. In this part of the sawmill, they take a tree, chop it into smaller pieces, and then slice it up like paper. These thin sheets of wood will eventually be glued together to form the inside layers of plywood and used to make cheap furniture. Tropical hardwood is in great demand all over the world. Up to now, most of it has come from the tropical rainforests of Asia, but the tropical rainforests there are almost exhausted, so the attention of the logging companies is turning more and more to the Amazon. The forest is still vast, but already in Amazonia, logging has damaged large areas, often in a form that is not obvious. Elsewhere, there is no doubt that large-scale destruction of the forest is taking place. This is a cassiterite mine in the province of Rondônia. The rocks underneath the surface of the earth in Amazonia are rich in minerals: gold, copper, bauxite, iron, nickel, manganese, lead, and mining them is big business. The mine is called Bom Futura. It means great future. At one time it was the largest tin mine in the world. But it is coming near to the end of its life, now producing 3,000 tonnes of cassiterite a year, compared with the 15,000 tonnes at its peak. The cassiterite ore is found in weathered rock, and it can be mined using high-pressure hoses. It is worked into large ponds where it settles out. Left in the middle of the site is a hard core of unweathered rock, which won't yield to hoses, but it still contains some ore. The only way to get at it is with a pick and shovel. The work is very hard and the rewards are small. Men, women and children live and work on the mine to scratch an existence. Each one stakes a claim to a hole in the ground and keeps the proceeds. They're lucky if they earn £10 a day. However the ore is mined, the next stage of the tin process is the same. The ore has to be separated from the particles of rock that bind it. To start the separation, the cassiterite ore is heated and ground. The process is carried out several times. Eventually, it's washed. The lighter minerals are washed away. The heavier tin sinks. This is the final product from the mine. It will be exported all over the world to make tin cans. It's valued at $6,000 a tonne. But this is the environmental cost, an ugly scar on the landscape. Amazonia already has many mines like this, and there are other things that are waiting to be exploited from under the Amazonian soil. Large reserves of oil and natural gas have been discovered, and there are deposits of uranium. So mining and extraction are set to make this sort of impact on the Amazon rainforests well into the next century. But the biggest cause of deforestation in Amazonia so far has been cattle ranching. Rondônia was one of the first areas to be opened up when settlement began in the 1960s. Farmers flooded into the region to take advantage of the free land on offer from the government. But today, most of the farms are cattle ranches. This is the Dallas Ranch in Rondonia. Once the whole area was covered with rainforest. Now it's so big that the ranch owner has to give instructions to his ranch foreman by mobile phone.
Alô, Valendo, pega esse gado aí do pasto 3.
Feito. Tá ok, tudo de bom, tchau.
He keeps 2,000 cattle on 3,000 hectares of land. It sounds huge, but by Brazilian standards, this is only a medium-sized ranch. The neighbouring farm covers 15,000 hectares. These are zebu cattle, specially bred for tropical conditions. Ranchers here use the modern techniques of beef and dairy farmers around the world, like artificial insemination to improve the quality of their stock. It was once said that Amazonian beef was used in hamburgers in the fast food outlets around the world. But in fact, it's not true. Amazonia doesn't produce enough beef for its own population. The reason for this is that cleared rainforest gives way to poor cattle pasture. Much of the soil in Amazonia is highly acidic and not very fertile. Within 2 or 3 years, the only thing that will grow is grass. Grass so poor that even the cows are reluctant to eat it. It would need huge amounts of fertilizer to turn it into rich pasture, and fertilizer is simply not available in quantity in the area. So cattle get what they can from the grass, then have to be moved to other fields. If the rancher runs out of pasture, he simply clears more forest. But clearing land for grazing is a way of claiming possession of land in Brazil. And the big companies who own the cattle ranches now own vast areas of Amazonia. They will control more, if only because other settlers are deserting the land. Tens of thousands of small farmers came to Western Amazonia to take up the free land offer. Roads were built to provide access. Altogether, it's estimated that 1 million people came here to start a new life, only to have their dreams turned to nothing. Marisvaldo de Souza was one of those settlers. He came to the state of Rondonia in 1984 after seeing television advertisements which promised a new start and a new place. His first task on arriving at his 50-hectare plot with his family was to clear the trees so that he could plant crops. But he soon found, along with thousands of others like him, that the Amazonian land could not live up to the promises. Though this may look plentiful, the infertile soil generally gives poor yields. Marisvaldo gets by with a main crop of coffee. He is also part of a cooperative which sells beans to buyers for the big coffee companies. But prices are low. The same applies to his other produce like cocoa, corn, rice and fruit. He says the government promised them help with fertilisers and good prices for their crops, but they haven't stuck by their promises. But at least he's hung on in there. Many thousands of small farmers have deserted their farms and moved on, only to repeat the same sorry experience elsewhere. Taken all together, the exploitation of the Amazon rainforest so far has proved highly damaging. Estimates of the rate of deforestation vary widely and are the subject of much argument. Environmental campaigners say that the rainforest will have disappeared in 40 years' time. The Brazilian government's official figures talk about a lifespan of another 300 years and more. Whatever the lifespan, can we afford to lose one of the natural wonders of the world? Why would anyone want to build a vast dam in the middle of nowhere? Create one of the largest artificial lakes in the world? And in the process flood 2,400 square kilometres of rainforest? The reason can be found 150 kilometres to the south. Manaus is a large modern city in the heart of the rainforest. A city whose population has grown from 600,000 to nearly 2 million in the space of 30 years. All modern cities need electricity, so the Balbina Dam was built to meet the needs of Manaus. But demand was increasing rapidly, and it was built in a hurry with insufficient research. It's not surprising that it's not been a success. Planned to generate 250 megawatts of electricity a day, it actually produces less than half that, 112 megawatts. There are many problems. The catchment area from which the water is collected is too small, and the vast reservoir is too shallow. A third of it is less than 4 meters deep. These trees are growing in the middle of the lake. There are environmental problems too. Decaying vegetation produced a lot of methane gas and has made the water so acidic that it corrodes the turbines. Because Balbina can't work to its planned capacity, Manaus still has to rely on oil-fired power stations for much of its electricity. And the oil is imported, as are most things for the city, along the Amazon River. The river is why Manaus is located where it is. Manaus stands at the place where two major rivers of the Amazon system meet, at the confluence of the Solimões and the Negro rivers. This is the focus for all the rivers of the Eastern Basin. The meeting of the two rivers is an incredible sight. The Solimões River is heavy with sediments which give it a creamy colour. The Rio Negro, by comparison, carries little sediment. It is known as a black water river. The flow of the two rivers is so strong at the point where they meet that the waters stay separate. Because of its location, Manaus grew up as a port. Ocean-going ships can reach Manaus, although it's more than 1,000 kilometres from the sea. Wharfs line the riverbanks and the port bustles with activity. In a region with few roads and no railways, Manaus is the transport centre. Cargoes are offloaded out of smaller boats to be sent along the river system. And it is the smaller boats which bring the produce of the region into the port. Some of it to be consumed by the people living in the city, and the rest to provide return cargoes for the big ships as they head back down the river to sea. Most of the produce is food, traded in the waterfront markets. The fish market is the largest of these. The Amazon has a greater range of freshwater fish than any other river, and a good selection of them are available freshly caught in the daily fish market. The best are sold to restaurants and hotels in the city. But Manaus is also a major passenger port. The rivers are the motorways of the basin, carrying goods and people everywhere. River buses carry passengers to and from villages upstream and downstream of the city. It is commuter traffic, perhaps a little different to the kind found in other cities around the world, but it's still commuter traffic. Behind the port is a city easily recognisable to anyone who has seen a modern city. From the air, the city centre is clearly visible. High-rise buildings dominate the skyline, the office blocks of the central business district. People come here to work, to shop, and for leisure. The streets are jammed with cars. The people cram onto buses. It's the same all over the world. Around the centre, the city stretches to the horizon. A mixture of industrial sites, the heavy industries strung along the river, and residential areas, poor areas in the inner city, and great wealth further out. Jobs and houses dominate the city of Manaus. Since 1967, the population of the city has grown rapidly. People moving into the city from villages in the forest, from cities on the coast, all seeking work. The city has grown to accommodate them. This is a new housing development for families on low income. It is built on the edge of the city, on land which was once used to grow food crops for Manaus. Land which was exhausted and abandoned. Unfortunately, last year only 500 of these houses were built in a city where the population is increasing by more than 30,000 a year. The result? Most incomers find homes in places like this, makeshift houses built from packing cases and polystyrene from nearby industrial estates. Manaus is ringed by settlements like this, homes with no running water, electricity or sewers. In time, those people may manage to find a home here. Again, houses built without permission, on creeks off the river, with only the most basic of services.
I'd really like to move out of here, but we can't afford to. There's a lot of pollution here from the floodwater. In the rainy season, there are lots of rats and mosquitoes. They give us diseases. Diseases of the skin and fevers, particularly for the children. There's also a bad smell because the sewer system doesn't work and there's a lot of garbage. It's a bad place to live.
Lindemar has lived here for 15 years, but it is merely the latest stop for her family on a journey which started 50 years ago and 2,000 kilometres away on the coast. Her grandparents left Recife to take up land in the forest. The government was giving it away. But the land was poor, the farm failed, and eventually they headed for the city of Manaus, hoping to find work. No one knows exactly how many people live like this in Manaus, probably over 1 million. It's sobering to think that this is better than the life they have left. But it has one big advantage, and that's why many people want to live here. It's near the city centre, and that's where work is. Lindemar's family depends on this work, and they are lucky. Fredo works as a shoeshine boy in the city centre. Mari cleans windscreens at the petrol station. And Lindemar's husband works in the fish market. Brazilians love parties. This one is a festival of Brazilian culture, celebrating the vitality of the city of Manaus. It's a free party, open to everyone, whether from the shanty towns or the suburbs. But celebrating the success of the city might be premature. In the same way that these dances have little to do with true Indian culture, Manaus, the city in the forest, has little to do with the forest, and that could be its problem in the future. The port throngs with small boats apparently carrying produce into the city from the surrounding forest. But in fact, the area of Amazonia produces only 10% of the food that's consumed in the city. The land around Manaus is not very productive. Most of the farmed areas around Manaus are now abandoned, the soil worked out and no longer able to produce crops. And where the forest is intact, there are no roads or rivers, so the problems of transporting produce into the city are too great. So most food has to be imported into Manaus. It comes in various ways, by air from the farming regions in the south of Brazil, along the Amazon River system, or by road, though roads in Brazil are a trial. Dodging massive potholes is a regular hazard for lorry drivers because the roads are difficult to maintain in the heat, and long stretches are closed during the rainy season. It's one reason why Manaus only has one major road connecting it to the rest of the country. The Pan-Amazonian Highway runs from Boa Vista in the north to Porto Velho in the south. Even then, trucks loaded with goods from the south have to be ferried across the river, all adding to the times and costs of transport. Food comes in along these routes, and so do the materials that keep the industries of Manaus turning. For in the middle of the greatest forest on earth, with huge reserves of timber, surrounded by valuable and in many cases untapped mineral resources, what do you think the factories of the city do? They assemble television sets, videos and washing machines, using parts imported from Japan, the United States and Europe. Why? The answer is that the same government which gave land to Lindemar's family also decided to develop an industrial base on the Amazonian frontier, and Manaus was the location chosen. In 1957, the city was declared a free trade area. Duties were removed from all imported goods shipped into Manaus. The result was a boom in consumer spending, people flooding in from all over Brazil to buy cheap TVs, cookers and washing machines. Soon after, the Brazilian government also removed trade barriers to bringing in the parts to make those things. So Manaus became the electrical assembly line capital of the country. This time, big international companies rushed in to join the boom. It brought much-needed jobs and prosperity to Manaus. 20 years on, Manaus has all the trappings of a modern city, including shopping malls to rival any European city. And this has brought with it a boom in service industries of all kinds. This girl works in a high-class clothes shop, and her wages are comparable with those in Britain. She gets paid £600 a month. But this 14-year-old boy, working a back-aching 6 days a week on the waterfront, is lucky if he takes home £10 a month. And there is little state help for poor families. Most young people in Manaus divide their day between school and a job. In Brazil, schools are arranged to enable that. School sessions last for 5 hours, morning, afternoon or evening. Most modern cities depend on service industries, but Manaus faces a serious problem. Employment in manufacturing industry is now falling as government aid has been cut back. This in turn affects the service industries. Manaus could soon be facing a jobs crisis. The difficulty is how to create long-term jobs in a location like Manaus. Remember, it's halfway up the Amazon in one of the most remote areas on Earth.
São de frutas.
Fernando Collier is a journalist in the city.
Temos aos milhares. Esse desenvolvimento.
We need to develop industries whose raw material is here in the Amazon. Fruit, wood, fishing, the food industry, grain production. Development with our products from this region, this is real development for the future. Any other industry, for instance the electronics industry, can change plans and shut down its factory in Manaus and move to Singapore, Taiwan or Sao Paulo. But not the industry which uses local raw materials. It will stay here.
So making use of the forest could be the way forward. And there's more than one way to exploit the rainforest. Great hopes are pinned on this, ecotourism. These people are paying £100 a night to stay in a jungle lodge in the rainforest. They can get close to some of the rarest animals in the world. They can thrill to the night sounds of the forest and the river. They can go alligator hunting.
It's a female. Alright. No. This is a species we have most in Amazon. This species can go to a length of 3 meters. Yeah, this is young.
How old do you think?
8, 9 months.
And why?
Might be a year.
Eu pego a coca.
They can sample life in a Caboclo settlement and buy souvenirs. More and more places are springing up around Manaus, offering what they call rainforest experiences. But tourism alone cannot save Manaus. It's in a curious position, a city without a region, a service centre with no population to serve except those living within the city. The future of Manaus may depend upon a change in attitudes towards the rainforest and the development of new ways of exploiting it.